Good morning, everyone. Tim Anderson here, aka Renfell. Welcome to the latest Project Dramond update video. In this case, we're going to be diving in and reading Chapter 3 from Book 1. Coffee's brewing in the kitchen, the water's boiling, so it's a perfect time for me to sit down and dive into this with everybody. If you've not already done so, make sure to check the links below and listen to or read through Chapters 1 and 2 along with today's chapter, which will get you wrapped up with the introductory trilogy of chapters for Book 1, which establishes the city of Parthana as the setting where the adventure is taking place. It's also the same place where the first campaign module is taking place in the overall project. So, without further ado, let's dive in and read through Chapter 3 of Book 1 of the Project Dramond series. The next 2 hours were spent in joyful remembrance, the trio washing back stories from their youth with several mugs of Thannon's homemade brew. It had been almost 5 years since they had been in one room together, with Fearon and Halen busy out west between Forkland and Whitecliff, running a small but successful shipping agency that specialized in legitimate trade, along with a handful of off-the-book items for those clients who preferred their dealings sans entanglement with church authorities. And with Fearon's sea elf background and elven sloop, it had been a profitable venture since their last campaign together. "Where's Liana?" Fearon's voice took on a more serious note as they finally reached a stopping point in their reverie. She had hoped to find the high elf here with Thannon. She had raised the dwarf since he was a babe, rescued from the ambush that had killed his parents. The elven mage had been their stalwart leader for more than a century of adventures throughout the realms prior to Thannon settling down in Parthana, and her and Hyland busy with their own trade. Thannon jerked his head towards the elven district, the central tower of the Circle of Mages just poking through the trees, visible through the eastern window of the room where they now sat. "Mage business," he replied with a grunt. "Beyond me. All I know is there have been some tensions between the Circle and the Church, but nothing new there." Fearon nodded. She was a druid by training, having spent several decades at sea aboard the vessels of her own people as a merchant mariner. And she was learned in the ways of the wind and the water and the land that all elves held dear, but all elves were familiar with the Circle of Mages, mirrored after the legendary Ternia Hathal. Of the High Elves from where all elven kind traced their ancestry, the High Council in the common tongue. Supposedly the Circle still kept in touch with the High Council back in the elven capital of Maniala, but she had never heard more than rumors. Her own people had not had contact with the High Elves since the days when they had left the home city all those centuries ago alongside the Wood Elves, their cousins. The Dockmaster wasn't exactly in a welcoming mood. I wonder if that has anything to do with what's going on. Thannon shrugged and took another swallow of ale, draining his 6th cup in a mighty swallow. He belched into his forearm and wiped froth from his mustache. "Gritty bugger's always looking for coin above all else. I wager I've put 3 of his children through university by this point." Halen let out a short laugh at the comment. No matter the years that passed, the dwarf's time in the city hadn't lessened his wit. "What of Bellion?" he asked as he looked around. Thannon's cousin was noticeably absent. The dwarf spat into the dirt. "Lazy bastard took a desk job back in Glesnevere, if you can believe it." He shook his head. "I didn't think he had it in him, let alone the stomach for those mountain dwarves." They were notoriously distrusting of the world beyond their gates, and he hadn't even had a single letter since Bellion had decided to return to the homeland and abandon his partnership in the forge they had founded together here in Parthana. Said he was tired of all the hustle and bustle of the humans, wanted good solid rock around him. Thannon heaved a deep sigh and stood up with a grunt, making his way towards the half-sized barrel of ale in his living room bar. He turned the tap and poured his 7th mug in silence and took a long swallow. He belched again and blinked twice. Had the room just spun? He shook his head and made his way back, sinking into the comforting embrace of the cushions. "But where's the fun in burying your head in the rocks?" "Well, whatever's going on, the church seems serious about it." Hyland's voice was thoughtful as he turned his gaze from his friend towards the window and the city beyond the trees outside of Thannon's home. "A plague is serious business," replied Fearon. She took a drink and pursed her lips. "It's been, what, 174 years since Angloria?" 73, Hyland corrected her, his voice soft. He felt a sudden pang in his chest, one that had long been absent. It was lesser than it had been all those years ago, but as distant as the memory was, he could still recall their faces, the contorted limbs, the smell of rotting flesh and burned bodies. "I'm sorry, lad." Thanon raised his mug in memory of the half-elf's family, while Farron reached out a hand and squeezed her life partner's knee comfortingly. Hyland nodded his thanks, but his gaze remained troubled as he continued looking out the window. The next few minutes passed in silence, and their respective mugs were drained as they recalled the piles of burned corpses, smoldering in the summer breeze, the magics of both the church and circle nearly depleted as they had struggled to finally contain the sickness. It had spread like wildfire in the summer heat, black boils and split skin, the wailing of the sick and dying a constant thing that kept everyone awake for days on end. It had taken nearly a month for the combined efforts of elemental magic and quantum energy to finally turn the tide, and by then more than half the population of the city had been lost. Thankfully, the quarantine had kept the plague from spreading beyond the city walls, but only because it had been caught in time. "Let's hope that's not the case," murmured Farron into the stillness. They all nodded gravely and sank back into thoughtful silence, hoping that Ophelia would bring back good news. The Chamber of Wisdom was full today for the first time in at least 2 years, if Byron's memory served. It was bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun reflecting off the bay, the entire eastern section of the room opening up to the massive balcony that overlooked the Plaza of the Innocents below, the raised dais in the center, the place from where the enlightened father addressed the masses each week. Voices were low and muted as the other elders murmured amongst themselves, all of them curious as to why they had been summoned. His stomach churned beneath the weight of what he expected. He studied the faces of his peers and saw no worry that matched his own. Malcolm Renault, with his one half-closed eye, head bowed slightly as he spoke in hushed tones with the man to his right. Ulrich Charney, the latter man's beard as well trimmed as it ever was, if sporting a little bit more white than it had the last time Byron had seen him. Both men seemed at ease and were chuckling over something said between them. No trace of concern whatsoever. Byron frowned and adjusted himself in his chair, the cushion beneath him feeling hard as stone despite its thickness, the room somehow hot and stuffy despite the ever-present breeze that kept the chamber cool even on the hottest of days, privilege afforded from its height at the top of the Vestige Temple looking out over the entirety of the city. The only thing that marred the view were those 8 towers on the eastern side of the bay, the blight that was the circle of mages and those fey sorcerers. He felt bile rising in his throat as the images from the morning floated back into his thoughts. Dozens of human bodies laid out in cold slabs beneath the city, not an elf, dwarf, brownie, or halfling among them. The central tower of the mages, rising high above the others, mocked him with its pristine whiteness, the setting sun reflecting off the surface and causing him to avert his eyes. He grimaced as he reached for the pitcher closest to him on the table and poured a healthy serving of red wine into the silver goblet in front of him, swallowing the bile down. He forced his breathing to slow and closed his eyes, silently asking forgiveness from her for yet another time today. The murmuring cut off, and there was the sound of chairs being pushed back and feet shuffling at the floor of the chamber. Byron opened his eyes at the sight of His Holiness, the Enlightened Father, entering from the northern entrance to the room, the man's piercing green eyes visible even from this distance, his body covered in the aura of an eye that radiated out from the ring that rested on the index finger of his right hand, its faint blue glow barely visible but nevertheless pulsating with power that Byron could feel even from this distance. His own ring echoed the same pulsating tempo, the quantum energies that entwined all of the elders causing the room to begin to throb with a deep hum that was almost inaudible but could be felt in the very bones. As one, the elders bowed their heads as His Holiness approached the long marble table that stretched the length of the Chamber of Wisdom, and took his place at the gilded chair marked with the symbol of their faith, its golden rays resplendent against the bright white of the fabric, the black metal of the frame one of the few titanium remnants brought north from the time of the Quantum Wars. "Please, my children, be seated." The enlightened father's voice thrummed through the room, and Byron moved to sit alongside the rest of his brothers when His Holiness spoke again. "Please remain standing, Elder Lightforge. Your testimony is vital to what we must decide today." Byron felt his heart lurch in his chest momentarily, a natural reaction to being singled out. He felt all eyes turned to him, and he swallowed against the lump in his throat. Why did he feel so nervous? This was not his first time addressing the chamber. He tried to still his mind and willed his back even straighter as he stood to attention. "As some of you are aware, there's a sickness ravaging our city." The enlightened father's voice was calm, his words slow and measured as his eyes scanned the room, giving brief moments of direct contact with each and every one of these elders. A plague unlike any we have seen before, and one that resists even our holiest of relics. Murmurs sprang up around the chamber, and alarmed glances began to be cast about, mostly silenced as their leader raised his hand to quiet them. This is not Angloria, where the disease was difficult, but eventually overcome. She is testing us in a way that she has not done since the time of the Quantum Wars. His eyes scanned them all, piercing into their very souls. Some shivered under the raw power of that gaze, which slowly moved to Byron. He remained straight, his convictions strong. Please, tell us of your findings, Elder Lightforge. Byron swallowed against the dryness of his throat, wishing desperately that he did not want a swallow of wine as badly as he did. It is worse than Ingloria, your holiness. He swallowed again and pushed the nerves down. The death rate appears to be 100% in those infected, and most appear to die within the first 2 days of being infected. More murmurings around the table, and this time the enlightened father did nothing to stop them. Byron felt his courage growing as he continued. My investigations have found no visible cause of the plague. In Ingloria it was rats, as the elders might recall. Many nods from around the table. My only conclusion is that the plague must be magical in nature. His last statement was met with gasps from some, widened eyes from others, and pursed lips from the remainder. His Holiness raised a hand to calm the table. What evidence do you have to support this claim? Byron licked his lips nervously before he spoke. I have yet to see a single Fey affected, enlightened father. The only ones who appear to be dying are our own people. What else could it be but Fey magic used to poison those they view as invaders ever since our arrival? Murmurs became shouts as the chamber erupted into chaos with the accusation, and Elder Byron Lightforge felt the eyes of His Holiness burning into his soul. He prayed to her for strength. That is the end of chapter 3, everyone. So, hopefully you enjoyed. Don't forget, the first link below is to chapter 3 if you want to go read it over on Patreon, and below that are the links to chapters 1 and 2 so that you can finish reading the whole trilogy or listening to it if you haven't already done so. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get all updates for future Project Dramond stuff that we're doing here on my YouTube channel. And of course, don't forget to pick up a subscription over at Patreon so you get access to the private Discord. We're getting ready to do a lot of cool stuff. We're finalizing the name of the intellectual property. Actually, we did that last night. So this weekend, I'm going to be buying websites, getting all the LLC set up, and setting up all of our social media. And at some point in the next couple of months, we're actually going to be rebranding the Patreon, and it will no longer be called Project Dramond, but something different. So if that all interests you, make sure to subscribe here and pick up a subscription over at Patreon, and we will see you over in Discord. Until next time, stay safe.